going to be talking about 5 teaching tips for today. And before we get too deeply into it, if you'd hold the questions till the end, then I'll have Jill look at chat. Um, I'm probably not going to take the entire 30 to 45 minutes because these are just tips. And they can be somewhat detailed, but they're not that detailed. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I came up with this because I remembered years ago when I first started teaching, I really could have used these tips to help me get started. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Tip number 1, which is probably familiar to most of you, create a lesson plan. Ask yourself, what is this? Let me get rid of this window over here. There we go. Hang on a minute. I knew this was going to happen. Make sure you contact the instructor to find out what topics to talk about in class. You want to ask yourself, how long is the session going to be? What resources will be used? What handouts or links students will need? A lesson plan is sort of your roadmap to what you're going to do in the class. And another thing about contacting the instructor, you want to make sure that the resources that you share are the ones that the instructor and the students are really going to use. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. Pretty much what I do is I just take a piece of paper and I go through everything that I'm going to go through, and that's my lesson plan. Jill, is there a way to get rid of this window up here? Okay. Okay, well, we're going to move on to creating a lesson plan. We're going to move on to our next tip, which is active learning methods. There's been a lot of talk about active learning methods, different ones. I'm not going to do all of them here, but what I've done is I've just chosen a few that I think are really useful and are really make your class a little more dynamic than you standing up there and just talking about things. So let's go and look at chain notes. Chain notes is a technique that you can use in a class. And what I've done with my teaching methods here is I do a how and a why. How you do the method and why you do it. So our first one is chain notes. How you do this is each student responds in 1 to 2 sentences to a question, and then they pass that paper to the next student. And then the next person adds their response, and then they keep passing the paper until everyone in the class has shared their information on the note. And it usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes. One thing that came up when I was looking at this, you probably wouldn't want to do this when you're thinking about COVID because you don't want students passing things between them. But there might be another way to do that. I'd have to think on that. The why for chain notes is it allows students to draw on their own ideas and examine others' thinking. It can reveal the extent to which students have an understanding of the topic. Once the responses are completed, you can share responses with the class to talk about any gaps in understanding of concepts. So this is a good one, sort of good icebreaker, helps them to start thinking about research, about what they want to do in the class. And that's chain notes. The other one, and this happens to be my favorite, the 1-minute paper. Now, I generally do my 1-minute paper at the end of class. And I set that time aside for students to write down their biggest question or any new knowledge they learned about. In other words, I might start out with a question, what did you learn about the library today? Or is there something that you didn't learn about today that you wanted to know? And the third question is there anything that I didn't cover that you feel you should have known about? So I ask a few questions. They're not big questions. They can give me short answers. And the reason that I like the 1-minute paper is that this activity encourages students to reflect on their experience and build writing skills. You can also get some insight into what they understood about your session and any misunderstandings they may have, so that the next time you do the class, you're aware of some of these things that students have brought to your attention. So the 1 minute paper, I think, is just one of my favorites because it allows them time to sit down and think, which is the process of what I want them to do, is sit down and think. Okay, the next one is think, pair, share. You're probably familiar with this method. You set students up in groups of two. You ask the class an open-ended question, what resource would you use for finding books on the environment? That's open-ended. And have them agree on their response. Then have them share that response with the class. And what this does is that by discussing the question with a partner, it maximizes participation, focuses attention, and engages students in comprehending material. Again, that sharing of information, that feedback between the students and the feedback to you, that really helps the class flow. It really helps other people thinking about, well, how am I going to do this research? And they've asked me this question, and let's sit down and talk about it. I like the brainstorming aspect of this because they're going to agree on the answer to the question, but they're also going to discuss it. And my other favorite is the 5Ws worksheet, which is essentially a worksheet that has, I'm going to point these out here, that has a topic, and then you have who, what, when, where, why. Then they have their focus topic, problem or argument, and then their search terms. So what you do is you have this worksheet up on the board, up on the overhead, and you go over the different parts with them. You go over, put your topic in here. Maybe your topic is air pollution. And you go over each and every individual part of it, and you sort of do a sample run. You show them, well, this is how you would do this. And then once you're finished with the demonstration, you pass out the worksheet. But before they can fill it out, this is probably something kind of unusual. In order for them to fill this out, I ask them not to use Google or the internet because I want them to sit down and ask themselves questions about the topic. I don't want them to go out into the Google sphere and find answers and just fill it out like that. I really want them to sit down and think about that topic and take themselves through these questions. So what they do is they fill all of this out. They come to a stopping point with information resources because that's where I come in with talking to them about resources. But the purpose of this exercise is to provide time for students to develop a topic. It encourages critical thinking and helps in the development ideas. I have used the 5Ws worksheets for English 1101. I've used it for a few SCOM classes. I think I even did it for an 1102, and it's been really successful. Faculty members really like this idea, and they're doing the worksheet in class. So if they have questions or if they run into a snag, I'm there to help them out with that. But it's a really nice 15-minute kind of activity. And 15 minutes seems to be the right amount of time for them to do this and right amount of time for them to kind of get into the sync of thinking and reflecting. And that way they're ready to talk about information resources. This is what one looks like when it's filled out by a student. It's not going to be fancy because this is something they can take with them. But they put their topic in the top, recovery and COVID side effects. They put in who, people who had COVID, what symptoms, side effects, long-term, when, now, post-COVID people, treatment, where, everywhere, why people have long-term symptoms. And then they can put a question or a statement or an argument. How long do COVID symptoms last after infection? And then they could put in their search terms, COVID, side effects, symptoms, treatment. The search terms come from the who, when, where, what, and why. And I tell them to stop when they get to information resources because that's my turn to jump in and talk about the resources that we have available to them. Okay, so that is the 5Ws worksheet. I'd have to say next to the 1 minute paper, that is my favorite exercise to do with students because I think they do get a lot out of it. Okay, tip number 3 is to use props. You want to use things like index cards if you have an in-class activity and you want students to, provide you with feedback or hold up a card, or some activities might require it. Use a laser pointer. Um, Use paper, pens, post-it notes. And this one, walk and talk, move around the room. Um, what I do, or what I'm starting to do, is I want to go into the center of the classroom and or on the side, and I do my talking from a different standpoint in the classroom. I don't do it like, at the podium all the time. I sometimes will go to the side of the room or in the middle of the room, and I'll talk about a resource and I'll demonstrate the resource, just so that I can communicate with my students rather than talking at them. Make sure that if I'm standing there, they've got a question, I'm right there to answer their question. So you want to use props. The 4th tip, and this is something we all need to keep in practice with, is to ask yourself some questions. Okay, what worked well about my session? What do I need to work on? What activity didn't work as expected? Because sometimes you'll do a class and you'll think, oh, this was a great idea and I'm going to use it in class. And then for whatever reason, maybe a lot of the students just aren't getting how the exercise works, and you sort of had to backpedal and refocus. And it also gives you it gives you an influence to think, well, maybe I should do that differently. Also, talk to colleagues. Ask them what they did for their session. What tools are they using? How long did their activities take? What challenges did they have? Because you're not alone. When you're doing instruction, anything can happen. And I do mean literally anything can happen. Technology can fail you. Uh, Students using a computer with you can fail you. If you're doing an online session, there might be technology glitches. So you have to sort of think on your feet, like, other ways that I could provide this information. The next step is to always be open to learning new ways to get students to achieve success. Be sure students know that they can reach you via email, phone, or chat. I tend to tell them, hey, I'm on the desk at Clarkston from 12 to 2 every Monday through Thursday, and you can always contact me. I think it's very important that students know that you're there to answer their questions and to get them started on to success. Tip number 5, and this is really important, is make sure that you gather and report all your data for your classes. Make sure you're putting it all in LibInsight. Be as clear and concise as possible. The information used in LibInsights helps us to develop library instruction now and in the future. The data assists GSU Library in library instruction services such as librarian training, workshop planning, and the mission of student success. Now, if you want to learn more, I've got several resources here. The American Library Association has instruction guidelines. ACRL has the Framework for Information Literacy in Higher Education. And of course, we have Georgia Library Association has the Carteret series webinars. And then, of course, Georgia State University has instruction sources to support learning and teaching online. Does anyone have any questions? I know that I went through that really fast, but they are just tips, and I couldn't go into depth on a lot of things. But if you do, just, I guess, put them in chat, and Jill will let me know. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Feel free to speak up. I'm looking at chat, and most of them are my comments. I really like how that the 5W sheet helps them come up with possible search terms, which gives the librarian something to work with to help get them started with searching. And I've also always found, and I noticed with that one that you showed too, that sometimes you can also use that to help them come up with what's going to be a useful search term. Like sometimes they'll come up with things that are too broad, or, too narrow. And you can then work with them sort of gently to show, like, this is what happens when we search on that term. Wow, that's a lot of results. Let's go with something narrow. What might that narrow term be? So that you're sort of partnering with them to help
Mm-hmm.
them come up with workable terms without kind of dissing the terms they've come up with. I mean, I like
Right.
how that those 5 Ws help point them towards search terms, which then you can then kind of take over and work with them to teach, whatever you need to teach, how to search, how to use. I always like that for like how to get from keywords to subject terms and
Mm-hmm.
back, because I do that now. So I thought that was really cool.
Okay. Yeah, it's my favorite thing in the world to use with students because we really didn't have a tool like that. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the instruction librarians kind of came up with a draft of that. And like you can change it any way you
Yeah.
want. I mean you can adapt it to any class that you want. I mean, like I said, I've used it for speech communication because the instructor was like, I want them to do a speech, but I want it to make sense. So, in other words, she wanted to kind of incorporate a flow into how they're thinking about their topic, and so that their speech could be a little better prepared than just, she said, a jumbled mix of not good information. So I thought that was interesting that
A
she,
jumbled mix.
yeah,
Yeah.
a jumbled mix. I said, okay. She said sometimes they think they know what they want to research, but they don't really ask the right questions about, they don't do the 5 Ws: who, when, where, what, why, just essentially all the different points about a topic. So.
I could see that being useful for journalism students too.
Oh yes, yes. Oh,
This
they
is
they
this
should
is a
they should
tool
know that.
this is a tool you already know. I mean, I'm always find that sort of interesting. Is like using tools for sort of for different purposes. Like this is a tool you already know about, or you should already
Right.
know about, and here's how you can use it also to start structuring your information seeking. Um,
Yeah, because it's completely adaptable. I mean,
yes.
I probably haven't even thought of all the ways you could use it, but to me, it's that starting point because I do a lot of the beginning, the freshman English, English 11, and
Yes.
maybe they haven't been really exposed to the research process. And so this kind of gets them kind of nudge. Because I've noticed when I give them this 5 Ws assignment and they're working on it in class and they're not using the computer, the first time I did that, they looked at me like, what? But I'm happy to say the results were really good. The results I got from that, because I got feedback, because at that time we had developed sort of a scoring thing to see what students answered on the sheet. I took that away, but the results were really good. And also, I also tell them, and that's one thing I left out, when they're doing the 5 Ws, they're more than welcome to meet with another student and they can work together on it in class. So there's that aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think with some of these, it could be really useful to have students, do these maybe individually or in a small group and then kind of report back to the bigger group.
Hmm.
Not just because they sort of get to learn about what each other are doing. I had one class where the students actively wanted that. But also, and I say this as somebody who, when you said you were doing things that you wish you had known about, for me as an undergraduate, was very underprepared for my very elite college, and it would have benefited me a lot to know that other people didn't already know everything.
Yeah, yeah,
There
yeah.
was a certain amount of, I mean, too much peer instruction would have been really overwhelming to me because it would have been like, wow, I really don't know anything. But being able to kind of see, Marnie Davis and I did this with our footnote mining exercise that, they could see that other students had questions that they were asking us. So they could see, okay, I don't, I am not the only person who might be confused. And to frame it in terms of like, I'm teaching you this, it's okay for you to be confused, for them to be able to share that and kind of see, okay, everybody's kind of at this level rather than they all know this and I don't. Can be really, I think that can help also with library anxiety.
Well, I think to a certain extent, even as like an instructor, you're still learning yourself because to me each class is like a learning exercise for me. because not every class is different. And what I liked about these tips is it's sort of a refresher for me. It's like, oh, keep this in mind, because I've been doing this a while and I tend to be like, oh, here we go. I'm just going to do another class. But really, you have to remember the experience is new to them.
Yes.
So we try to keep it fresh for them and fresh for you so that you're not just parroting and standing at the front of the classroom and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I want to keep it interesting for them and I want to learn along with them. So, but that's all I had, are there any other questions?
Are there any other questions? Does anybody else want to add anything or any questions, comments? Totally welcome. I can talk about this all the time, so I'm happy. I mean, I just had a couple things too about how team teaching for that reflection thing. I've really found that with like team teaching, it's really great for that after class reflection because often you and your co-teacher may have picked up on different things.
Mhm.
Or you may have talked with, if you're doing a floating exercise, you may have talked with different students. And for then afterwards, for, you as the team to come together and kind of pick up and compare notes, each person may have picked up on different things going on in the classroom. That work that didn't, this person was struggling. That can be really useful for that. Okay, how would we do this differently? This group wasn't talking. Why do you think that was? I found that really useful to have kind of the multiple two minds or more kind of
Mhm.
coming together to kind of assess at the end as well as planning at the beginning.
Yeah, because I think a lot of students, they just feel more comfortable, like if they're with another student and they're like, oh, we have to answer this question and we have to, but I've noticed too when I've done this, like when I've done the think, pair, share, like at first they don't know each other very well. Then they start talking and before you know it, there's this wonderful hum of activity going on where they're talking and they're discussing ideas and they're really, really into that groove of collaboration. That's really wonderful to see that starts out real quiet and kind of hesitant, and then it's like a rush of energy.
Well, and the other thing is, I mean, when you're talking about student success, now we have this, requirement that we have to, engage, have this to engage with students. And I'm blanking on, there's the acronym RSI, I guess. And I mean, especially for a school like GSU, which is large and kind of atomized and like almost a commuter school, it's really nice to have situations like that where you can start helping them kind of build relationships with each other too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because that doesn't always happen at a big dispersed campus like this. And to be able
Right,
to
right.
have it be that you're not just sort of teaching them individually, that they're coming together as maybe a group or, forming beginning friendships or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
through those kind of exercises. I think that also can contribute to student success in a more, I'm not sure what the term is, a more diffused kind of way that you're also helping them build, put down some roots at the university as well as just, I mean, maybe that's wishful thinking, but I can remember that when I was teaching as a professor that I had one class where there was a lot of bonding among the students. And that was a commuter school. And it was hard to, it was hard for students to make connections. And I used to love walking down the hall to that class because I would hear this roar of people talking to each other all the way into the hall. And it was such a special,
Yeah,
the students really thought that was a special class too. They could feel that energy and that sort of bonding throughout the semester.
yeah. Well, that's all I had.
Well, obviously, it's very easy for me to talk about this, but I want to make sure that people have the opportunity
Yeah,
as well to
yeah,
dig
yeah.
into.
I'm just, but it sort of came about this because of like I wanted to refresh my own approach to teaching because the one impact, of course, the most obvious, the largest one has been COVID. Because I've done,
Yes.
I haven't done full fledged. I think I did one last semester, one face to face. But I have a feeling, and I'm hoping that I'm right, that we're probably going to do a little bit more face to face. Maybe I don't know hybrid. I'm not sure. A library instruction is a great mystery as far as if we're going to get any sessions or not. But we do have some faculty that have been asking about it, so I'm hoping we can do a little more face to face, but I can't think ahead that far, even though next month is August already, so
Yeah, I've wondered if other people are dealing with that as well, if they've felt like the number of instruction sessions that they've had have fallen off because of COVID, or
yeah.
if they've gone more online. I know for me, there's been kind of I've had professors ask for in person, and I've been doing in person. I think I did my first in person class last fall, actually, which was kind of scary. And I have yet to do actually a hybrid class. I mean, it's been either like asynchronous or synchronous online or face to face. I haven't done hybrid yet. And
Mhm.
I, knock on wood, that sounds hard.
Yeah.
Have any people had experiences so far with doing, the hybrid where you're teaching, but there's also students attending? I mean, that's something I'm sort of curious about.
Well, I haven't done any, but I hear the term hybrid. I don't know anybody in my particular group here that's done that. I'm sure it's happening somewhere, but we haven't had much of that. We have been doing we have a faculty member that has students make consultation appointments with us, like to prepare for their
Yes.
speech, which is, no contact, but yeah, it is contact because they call or,
Right.
we do a session with them that way. We've been doing that. And that sort of is instruction because you're going over. So whenever I do those, I put that in the lib insight. Um, you know, any contact that I have. But I'm like, I have noticed in the past week there's been a lot more students registering. So,
Uh,
and we've been a little busier. So I don't know. I'm
it's coming.
it's like I was telling somebody, I
August
said,
is around the corner. Yes,
there
the
is a
American Family
buzzing
Business Week.
vibration going on because we've had a lot of them, and I can just tell because we didn't have this last summer. But this summer, where's the registration office? Where do I go to advising? Because we've had advising here in the building and registration, and we didn't have that last summer. But this summer, as we're getting ready for fall, we've had that a lot more. So
Yeah.
I just noticed the difference. I'm like, oh, students, yay.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be
So,
interesting to see what, because I mean, I'm thinking too about some of these tips. I mean, I know I've had to sort of adapt things for onlineness,
mm-hmm.
and it's interesting to think about how you might do some of these, the think, pair, share, or breakout rooms and that kind of thing. I do find myself kind of thinking as I'm thinking about teaching now, like, will I need to do this online, and how do I translate my lesson plan, or,
Well, I think any of these techniques is completely adaptable.
that's what I was
I mean,
thinking.
you can like do think pair share. It could be like a poll thing, or use pollster or whatever. Yeah, so that could just be something. Maybe some sort of virtual think pair share. I don't know. I can't think of how you would do that, but anything is possible, basically. I mean, any of these methods. I mean, because I've already adapted the five W's to things I've done. Like for the speech class, I adapted it a little bit. Um, haven't done any sessions for art faculty, but you never know.
Yeah,
You never know. I
that could be
mean,
that could be interesting too.
that could be very interesting.
Very interesting.
I had faculty that was doing it was English 1102. We weren't using the five W's, but I had to develop an exercise where they had to look for something historic or something culturally significant in Atlanta and the surrounding area. So what I did was she asked me to just make a preliminary little list for them to look at, and then they would go there and they would compile a report, and that was kind of interesting because I think one of them was looking for historical markers in DeKalb County. I'm like, you must be related to me because that sounds like something that I would do. But but that was an interesting class because we sort of worked together and collaborated on getting them the resources to learn about Atlanta and the surrounding area. And it was really neat. It was a really enjoyable class. I liked that project that they had. And the students did too.
Actually, I just realized I was muted. I mean, that can actually really help also with helping them kind of identify with their community. I'm going to be talking a little in my talk about a local history searching kind of thing. And, going out and finding something historic in the community can also be a way of helping them connect with the community.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think, what was it? It was about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer. A student wanted to know where the cyclorama was. Like, cyclorama. You've heard of the
Yeah.
cyclorama.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, and the other day I was driving down that way, and I guess it's closed now.
Because of COVID.
I don't know if it was. I'm thinking maybe it was closed before that, but I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I stuck this in chat, Ellen, but it was moved as part of the Atlanta History Center now, I believe.
Thank you. I didn't. Okay, that's good. That's good. Now I know where it is. Because they had taken it off the because usually on the interstate they'll say when there's a historic. I thought, well, where is the sign for cycle? That's good. Thank you for telling me that. That's good to know.
Okay, so I've got 10:30, which technically we have more time for questions and answers, or questions, answers, comments, thoughts. If anybody doesn't have any, we can go on break. And the next session will start at 11. But I want to make sure people feel like they've had the opportunity to participate if they're so inclined. Give it a few minutes. Ellen, thank you for this talk. Those were really
Oh,
those are interesting tips, and I can use some of them.
you're welcome.
I had to smile when you said that about lesson plans, because when I was co-teaching with Kevin, we started off doing lesson plans, but we moved to something that we kind of ended up referring to as lead sheets, where we didn't have a detailed lesson plan, but we kind of had, here's the
Uh-huh.
stuff we're going to do. It was like, here are the chords we're going to play, and then we're going to improvise with
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Which was, I had trouble letting go of the lesson plans, but I've always been somebody who writes a lesson plan out, and
Yep.
then I can then I end up improvising because I've got the lesson plan written out. So
Yeah, that I still do that. It was a habit that I started when I started teaching. I have my little pad of paper and I start at the top and I go all the way through everything.
yeah.
And now when I first started, I was like really intensely detailed about every
Yes.
little thing. But the more I taught, the more I'm like, well, what are the main things you want students to know? This other stuff they can find out later. What are the main things you want them to know?
It's like you're sort of giving them you have to come up with the skeleton first.
Yeah, yeah, and
The
I
lead
think it,
sheet with the chords. Here's what we need to.
yeah, yeah, and let them fill in the bones of it as they
Yeah.
do their activities. But yeah, yeah, getting away from that, standing at the front of the room, yak, yak, yakking. So I do my best to get away from that when I can.
Okay, well, I think I am going to put up we are on a break.
Okay.
Makes me think of the line from Friends, slide so that we can have that up. Please feel free to come. Thank you for coming. And please feel free, the next talk will be, mine on teaching with primary sources, working with what you've got. And, I ended up going off in a slightly different direction on that one. So that'll be at 11. Please feel free to come back. Thank you all for coming. And I will stop recording now.
Okay.